This week, join me as I travel back more than 3,000 years to unearth the true story of Queen Nefertiti. She was the most beautiful and mysterious woman in ancient Egypt, but suddenly, the super queen vanished without a trace.
Who was the mysterious Queen Nefertiti? Why did she disappear? Can her mummy still be found today? To find out, I'll follow a trail of clues into Egypt's most sacred and secret places. I'll explore dark tombs, descend a 40-foot shaft of sheer rock, and come face to face with ancient mummies. We're digging for the truth, and we're going to extremes to do it. December 6th, 1912. Egyptologists excavating the city of Amarna make a stunning discovery. They come face to face with one of the most beautiful women in the world, Queen Nefertiti. This magnificent painted limestone bust soon becomes one of the most famous icons of ancient Egypt. It's also a clue in a mystery that captures the imagination of the world.
Nefertiti means the beautiful one has come. But where did she come from? And where did she disappear to? Hi, I'm Josh Bernstein, and I'm on the trail of one of the most elusive and alluring women in history, Queen Nefertiti. Most ancient Egyptian royals spared no expense when it came to memorializing their lives. So you'd expect a queen as powerful and beautiful as Nefertiti to have an amazing monument to her memory, wouldn't you? But the view from this balloon shows me that there's nothing in Egypt to remind us of her life or death. No temple, no tomb, no pyramid. Archaeologists found the beautiful limestone bust of Nefertiti here in this 3,000-year-old ghost town. This was once the home of Queen Nefertiti and her husband, the pharaoh Akhenaten, one of the most controversial rulers in all of ancient Egypt. Akhenaten came to power in 1353 BC. Before his reign, the center of Egyptian life and power was the city of Thebes. Akhenaten and Nefertiti moved the capital more than 150 miles up the Nile River and built a new city, now called Amarna. There, they started a new religion, unlike anything Egypt had known before. Their court was known far and wide for its fabulous wealth, its mystical god, and its charismatic young king and queen. Today, the city has all but vanished, along with almost every trace of the captivating woman who was once its queen. What could have happened to Nefertiti? Archaeologist Ted Brock is going to help me search for Queen Nefertiti. And what better place to start than the royal tombs of Amarna? While there's not much left of the city above ground, there's plenty to see underground. I'm hoping to find my first clues to the mystery of Nefertiti and her pharaoh husband, Akhenaten. Wow. So Ted, what's this first sight?
Well, I thought I'd bring you up here. See this tomb? It's a high priest of Aten named Mary Ray.
Mary Ray?
Yeah, the one who loves Ray. That's what his name means.
Ted explains that inside this locked tomb is a rare glimpse into the lives of Akhenaten and Nefertiti.
Up here we've got an important scene of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Would you like a light?
We are surrounded by stunning images of the king and queen. Ted points out the main characters in each scene.
Akhenaten, Nefertiti. There are cartouches up there.
And it says Nefertiti.
Yeah. You can recognize over here that Nefertiti by her characteristic crown outlined here.
There are also images of the Aten, the sun god, depicted as a sun disk with rays coming out of it. Akhenaten and Nefertiti's new religion worshipped the Aten. and their religious revolution transformed ancient Egypt.
So over here is a more detailed version of the temple rituals, focusing on the royal family making offerings to the Aten.
The story of their new religion is literally carved into these tomb walls, as are the more practical and even personal aspects of their daily lives.
They're accompanied by Mary Ray, and they're throwing out collars of gold to him, which have been removed from here.
They really captured every part of their lives.
It's a really rich rendition of life, and I think that was important to them, to show all details of life.
It's like the first reality show. Outside here.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, yeah, lead the way.
Ted says there's even more just outside the tomb. These statues of Akhenaten and Nefertiti are on one of the boundary stelae that once marked their city's limits.
There's some inscription that talks about cutting the tombs for the king, for his wife Nefertiti, and for the eldest daughter Meritaten.
So one tomb for each of them.
That's what it seems to say.
So there'd be 3 tombs somewhere nearby.
At least 3 tombs, but they wouldn't be nearby. They'd be way in the desert. It's a long ways away, a long hike up a wadi to reach them.
We could go there if we wanted to.
Yeah, you could go.
Yeah, so let's go for it.
The tombs we're heading for are those of the royals themselves. They're about 3 miles from here. On the way, Ted tells me more about this mysterious woman. Akhenaten gave Nefertiti tremendous power as a queen. This limestone bust is the best-known tribute found to date. But it raises some questions. If Nefertiti was one of the most influential women in the ancient world, why was such a beautiful work of art cast aside unfinished? We're now entering the royal tomb of Akhenaten, Nefertiti's pharaoh husband. It was discovered in the 1890s, relatively recently because of its remote location. Yet when archaeologists opened it, the contents they expected to find were already gone. Was it robbed? Or did something else happen?
Yes, there he is. There's Nefertiti.
The archaeologists who found this tomb removed some of the artwork from the walls for preservation. Akhenaten and Nefertiti's artwork is considered to be as revolutionary as their religion. No other Egyptian nobles were pictured in such scenes of family intimacy and affection.
So
These panels are still in this tomb, in the chamber where Ted says their second daughter was buried.
Nefertiti's over here, and they're in these postures of mourning with their hands over their heads.
The images of them grieving provide rare glimpses of royal vulnerability.
Are there other members of the royal family buried here?
Yeah, we have a burial place for Akhenaten farther down the tomb.
Finally, we reach Akhenaten's burial chamber. His sarcophagus was found
Another
here,
room that has
smashed.
decoration.
But was Nefertiti buried here too?
Yeah. Right over
Every
here.
time I find her image, it's like it's erased. All I see are vague outlines of the unusual shape of her crown.
That's right.
We haven't found her sarcophagus here.
There's no evidence that she was buried in his tomb. No furnishings were found, no depictions of her funeral, nothing to indicate that she was here.
Unfortunately, there's not much more that this tomb can tell me. But Ted's given me another clue, that Nefertiti's mummy could have been moved to a different tomb. Sounds intriguing. The site is near Kar el Bahr, south of Amarna, in the Valley of the Kings, the giant graveyard of Egypt's greatest rulers. Egyptian pharaohs were often buried in elaborate tombs filled with riches. The tomb I'm heading for now held something even more precious to archaeologists: mummies. Tomb raiding was a serious crime problem in ancient Egypt. Kings were vulnerable from almost the moment they were laid to rest. Their riches and remains tempted looters willing to descend to the darkest depths of the earth. It was up to the priests to protect the royal mummies. And they came up with a brilliant plan. They started moving mummies. Could this be what happened to Akhenaten and Nefertiti? Is this why their mummies weren't found in the tomb built for them in Amarna?
Nigel? Hi, Josh.
Nigel Hetherington is an archaeologist familiar with this site. He tells me I'm going to be lowered into the tomb using this winch and cable. It's really dangerous. This rig is hardly ever used. But I'm determined to get to the bottom of the true story of Queen Nefertiti. I'm looking for clues into the mysterious disappearance of Queen Nefertiti. I found some hints of what her life was like in her capital city of Amarna. And I understand this secret tomb in Dar el-Bahri could give me some idea of what happened after her death. But it's not easy getting inside here, as archaeologist Nigel Hetherington and I are finding out.
Look over here. See that? That's a winch. They're actually going to lower us into the tombs. And they just rigged up the cables, and they say that it's going to work.
This is definitely sketchy. The ropes are frayed, and the belts look like they're about to snap. But this winch is really the only way to get inside this tomb.
There's a lot of yelling going on here. Be nice to know what they're saying.
This shaft goes straight down into the solid rock, 40 feet deep. Even the toughest tomb raider would have had a hard time finding any mummies hidden here. To make it even more challenging, the priests filled the bottom of the shaft with rubble, creating yet another obstacle to the mummy's hiding place.
I am amazed that anyone would put anything down here. Over here? Okay. Hello there. A lot cooler down here, that's nice.
The last obstacle was a wall at the bottom of the shaft, sealing off the tunnel that led to the actual mummy cache.
We can knock our way through.
That's what this is for?
Yeah.
Okay. But just whack away, huh?
Yeah, just knock your way through.
Probably better if I use this.
Today, it's bricked up for protection. But we have special permission to chip through this modern cement wall to see what's on the other side.
Oh, sorry. I just hope there's something in there.
I feel like the famous archaeologist Howard Carter when he unearthed the amazing tomb of King Tut. He broke through a wall a lot like this one, and when he peered inside, he and his patron had an exchange that went down in history.
Ooh. Wow, what can you see, Josh?
Wonderful things. Looks like the girls' locker room. Hello!
Well, it was something like that.
So while we're breaking down the wall, maybe you can tell me a little bit. What's in here?
Well, nothing now.
Nothing?
Nothing now, but it's actually one of the most important finds ever in Egyptology. The most famous kings of all of Egyptian history. Kings and queens, princesses, Seti I, Ramses II.
So all those people, the biggest and brightest stars of ancient Egypt, were buried here.
They were here, right here. The priests that moved them, the priests of Amun, took them from the Valley of the Kings, put them here for security.
It's okay. The trick is to get in without taking down the ceiling.
It may look dark and uninviting, but the mummies were safe here for 3,000 years.
It's a nice shaft.
It wasn't until about a century ago that some goat herders chasing a stray animal found this pit and ventured inside. It was a gamble to drop down the long, dark shaft, not knowing what was at the bottom. But they must have known it could pay off big time.
And now, onto the tomb. Pretty spooky experience to be the first person in here to So you know, you come down the shaft, you take out all that rubble, you break through the barrier, then it's just mummies.
The goat herders basically had their own private treasure chest down here.
This is cool.
And for the next 10 years, they sold artifacts from this tomb on the black market.
Wow.
Then, in 1881, Egyptian antiquities officials traced the artifacts back to this cache and moved in.
And they were just stacked right here.
Literally stacked all the way along. Corridor here. Just one on top of each other, no order, very random. Stacked to the ceiling, tilted everywhere, like a jumble set.
Within days, the archaeologists packed up the 53 mummies found in the cache and shipped them off to the Cairo Museum for identification and safekeeping.
Wow, the ceiling just collapsed in here, didn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty dodgy in here. This is a modern collapse.
This is
But were Nefertiti and Akhenaten in this cache?
That's right, yeah. This is the...
Were the Amarna mummies found here?
No. There were no Amarna period mummies found in here at all.
So Nefertiti and Akhenaten do maybe have tombs somewhere. And maybe mummies somewhere, but not here.
It's a possibility. People do think that the Amarna family are together somewhere.
So it's possible their mummies were moved just like these were. But where did they end up? Perhaps I can find out more at the museum in Cairo, where the mummies found here were brought.
So the next step is to the Cairo Museum. Atla! To Cairo.
The Cairo Museum has the world's greatest collection of Egyptian artifacts, and that includes mummies. Maybe Nefertiti and Akhenaten ended up there. I'm on a quest to learn what happened to Queen Nefertiti and her husband, the pharaoh Akhenaten. I didn't find the answer in Amarna, where she lived. But the royal cache has given me a new idea. The mummies buried there ended up in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Maybe the Amarna mummies are there too. So I'm going to Cairo. After days in the dry heat of the desert, it's nice to be out on the water enjoying the cool breeze. This is a traditional Egyptian sailboat called a felucca.
This one, appropriately enough, is called the Akhenaten. I'm hoping that with the guidance of Captain Gadola, I can get from Luxor to Cairo the old-fashioned way and see what it's like to travel Egypt by the Nile.
On the shores of the Nile, it looks like life hasn't changed much since Nefertiti's day. Until we approach Cairo. It may be a modern city, but it holds some ancient secrets. This is the Egyptian Antiquities Museum in Cairo. They have so many relics, mummies, and artwork that they only have room to display a small portion of them. I'm here to meet Dr. Nasri Iskander, one of the world's leading authorities on Egyptian mummies.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Let's see them. I think they're going to bring some mummies out to us, or we're going in. I'm not certain yet. They have a secret storage room that Dr. Nasri has arranged access for me. It's amazing. This is going to be the first time I ever see mummies. I can't believe they're actually bringing the mummies out here into the open air. Dr. Nasri, what is this that we're seeing?
This is the mummy of Amenhotep II.
Amenhotep II.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. 3,500 years old. Now, did he have anything in his hands?
We didn't find anything with him.
It looks like he may have been
it
holding.
looks that he have something.
Yeah.
Amenhotep II. Dr. Nasri tells me he was the great-grandfather of Nefertiti's husband.
And you can recognize here some of the smallpox on his shoulder and his neck.
He died of smallpox.
We don't know, but there is some smallpox on the skin.
Can I get that right now?
No.
No? It's okay?
There's nothing there.
Curse of the mummy?
Just the remains.
Okay. That is amazing. It's like he could speak. Hello.
They all speak to me.
They speak to you? What do they say? What do they say?
Keep us in a good way.
Yes, take care of me.
Take care of us.
Wow.
How amazing to see the mummy of one of Nefertiti's relatives. And there are lots more mummies where he came from.
This is the storage room for all your mummies? We're at the bottom of a staircase.
This is Ramses III.
I can't believe it. All these mummies, these are incredibly precious artifacts, and they're being stored temporarily at the bottom of a staircase. It's a staircase. But what makes this challenging is that they're labeled on the inside of each container. You think it's this one? So they have to actually open up one container, see who's in there, and then close it, and then move them all around.
The museum is building state-of-the-art climate-controlled rooms, but these temporary quarters let me get up close and personal with the mummies.
We gotta move. This is Ramses III? Ramses III.
They're looking for the one I really want to see, the remains which may be Nefertiti's husband, Akhenaten.
Yeah, this is the mummy.
But there's a lot of controversy about whose they really are. So I'm going to get some expert help from someone who's not only well acquainted with Akhenaten, but also with Ted Brock, who showed me the Amarna tombs.
This is Lila Brock. Lila is Ted's wife and also an Egyptologist, and Lila, you specialize in the skull that we're actually trying to see. This is very special access that they're giving us.
It is.
It's unusual.
You're very privileged.
How does this skull or body, what evidence does this give us today?
Well, of course, everyone's very curious as to whether this is the body of Akhenaten.
Okay, so the contents are still questionable? We're not really sure who they belong to?
It's almost the biggest mystery of the 18th dynasty as to who the skeleton belongs.
And you haven't seen the skeleton how long?
I haven't seen it since 1986.
So it's been almost 20 years?
It has.
Wow, okay. It sounds like they're ready. So we're going to go in and see what's behind the doors.
We're going back to the stairwell.
Gotta be careful where you put your hands. Ah, whoa.
Just the skeletal remains, nothing.
Just skeletal. 20 years since someone's seen this whole skeleton.
That's okay. This is, we found it in tomb 55. Yeah.
It's pretty amazing to be so close to the skull of someone who lived 30 centuries ago and apparently took his secrets to the grave. Is this really Akhenaten's skull?
At one point, people thought this was Akhenaten's skull?
Probably.
Yeah.
Nobody knows for sure.
There's a debate.
There's many opinions about this as there are scholars studying the
Okay,
Amarna
good.
period.
That's good to know. I think
We're still studying and we're still studying.
So who else could these remains belong to? Lila and Nasri tell me they may be the bones of someone named Smenkhare. The plot thickens. Even these experts don't agree. It seems Smenkhare was one of the most shadowy characters in all of Egyptian history.
We don't know it's Smenkhare. We really don't know a great deal at all about Smenkhare as an individual.
Because, of course, there is missing gaps.
yes.
Smenkhare could be one of the most important clues to Nefertiti's true story. He appeared on the scene about the same time Nefertiti disappeared. Some scholars believe Nefertiti may have changed her name and become Smenkhare. But why would Nefertiti need to change her identity? Nasri is taking me to the coffin where these questionable remains were found.
This is the cover of the coffin, which we found some bones.
The friends and relatives of Nefertiti are proving a challenge to identify. Is this the coffin of Smenkhare, Akhenaten, or someone else? Maybe the markings will tell the story the mummies won't reveal.
So tell me what this is?
Now, this is a lid of one of the coffins, which of this evidence has been destroyed by purpose.
I see.
And even here you see by yourself, the face is removed.
I don't understand.
No.
Who removed the gold?
Some other people.
Later.
Later.
Why?
Because of there is against each other in politics.
Oh, so they've defaced him.
Yes.
So by removing the face, we
By
don't
removing
know.
the face, he has no afterlife, and also the name of the king is removed.
So that's where the name would have been.
Yeah.
Who told
Then-
us who's inside here?
Yes. Who has no face and has no name, has no afterlife.
So someone came in and vandalized this, and they were very specific. They took the face off.
Yeah.
They took the name off. So now we don't know
That-
who was inside it.
Yes.
And what was in here? The scepter?
Yes, yeah. But you don't have it.
You don't have it. The person who probably did this
Yeah, and
took that too.
Also, the names of the king must
Would
be
have been
written
on
on
there.
this.
Oh,
That's
wow.
why they removed it.
So this is a John
He
Doe.
left only the praise.
This is a mummy John Doe.
Yeah.
It's like we don't know. We have a body, but we don't know who it belongs
Yeah.
to. See, that bothers me. Because I'm trying to find out the story, and it seems like the lead characters are erased.
But you know, I like the mystery in these stories.
You like the
because,
mystery?
Yeah, it keeps it all the way alive.
That's why you're an
people is
archaeologist.
asking, yeah.
Yes. It's a good mystery. It's amazing, though.
I feel like I've got more questions than answers.
The tomb 55.
This really reinforces
which
how hard it is
was
to
used
tell these
many
mummies
times
apart.
for the rejected persons.
And it seems that finding Nefertiti is a particular challenge. I definitely need a fresh perspective. A balloon ride's the perfect mode of transportation for the next leg of my journey, 3,000 years back in time. I'm going to the Valley of the Kings to investigate some more Amarna mummies, including the most controversial one of all.
There's a tomb here that dates from the Amarna period, and some believe it may contain Queen Nefertiti's mummy. To get a better view, I'll be going up into the air with Captain Bob. Morning, Captain.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
And then I'll be going underground with one of the world's premier mummy hunters. I'm floating over the Valley of the Kings in a hot air balloon because this really is the best way to get a view of this amazing place. For centuries, the pharaohs of Egypt outdid each other with grand monuments and tombs. Up here, you really get a sense of how they competed to be remembered for the ages. The tomb I'm heading for now is not much to look at from the outside. It's what's inside that's impressive. It may contain the mummy of Egypt's most beautiful queen, Nefertiti.
The tomb in front of me is KV 35.
And the man to help me get into it is Dr. Zahi Hawass, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities. As head of the SCA, Dr. Hawass oversees all of Egypt's archaeological sites. But as a field archaeologist, he may know more about the secrets of these tombs than anyone else alive. Dr. Hawass.
How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for
By the
coming
way,
this way.
the name KV 35 means Valley of the Kings 35. Each of the tombs here has been given a number which designates the order in which it was excavated. This was originally the tomb of Amenhotep II, the great-grandfather of Akhenaten, Nefertiti's husband. After his death, priests moved a number of Egypt's other kings and queens here for safekeeping. But when archaeologists first excavated it in 1898, they had no idea this was anything but an ordinary tomb.
Those are mummies.
Real mummies inside. You have to know that this wall was completely painted. And this was painted.
So it was covered.
Covered. No one really can know that actually behind this door there is something at all. Inside this room, they found 12 mummies.
12.
Now we can bring the adventure.
That's good.
Follow me.
Okay.
In 2003, another team of archaeologists arrived on a hunch that one of the mummies was none other than Queen Nefertiti. They found enough similarities between the mummy and the elusive queen to announce they had a match. But many Egyptologists believe that there wasn't enough evidence to make that claim.
That it is only one person.
As I learned at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, there can be as many theories about a given mummy as there are scholars. So let's start with the evidence the recent team used to make their claim.
Someone says this is Nefertiti because someone cut out her mouth and cut out her chest to sort of disrespect her. And look, there's no penis, so clearly it's a woman. And this hand held a scepter, so therefore it must have been someone who was regal and had a scepter. And the head is shaved, so therefore Nefertiti could wear her crown, and she had pierced ears, so she could wear her earrings. And all of that says Nefertiti.
But was it? Many scholars disagree. So I asked Zahi what he thinks.
Look at the mouth. They said someone came with a knife, damaged a part of the mouth, and also damaged a part of the chest. She said because this is as a revenge, because everyone hated Nefertiti. If you hate Nefertiti, if you lived 3,000 years ago, Josh, and you really hated Nefertiti, and you saw her mummy in front of you, will you really come with a knife and try to do this?
Yeah, I'd probably cut the whole head off.
Yeah, because if you want to get revenge from a mummy, you destroy the mummy.
Okay.
The second thing, they said this is a mummy, a part of a female.
Because it's missing something.
But if there is no penis in a mummy, it doesn't mean that this is a female. Because King Tut himself lost his penis right after the discovery.
After he died.
Then now, if you look at the mummy of King Tut, you will say that this is a mummy of a female.
Okay.
And actually, if you look at this...
And then there was the hand which could have held the scepter.
He said that this is a part of Nefertiti, but I don't understand really how this could fit with this mummy.
Where does it go?
It cannot fit with this mummy.
The one hand too many. So that hand probably belongs to a totally different person because there's already an arm on there.
Yeah. And therefore, I think, I don't really believe at all that this is the mummy of Nefertiti. But I want you to hold this, the last piece of evidence, which is the most important one. We did a DNA. We found that this mummy is a mummy of a man. This is not a mummy of a female. It is not a mummy of Nefertiti at all.
So if this isn't Nefertiti, where is she?
You know, archaeologists, Josh, who are searching in the Valley of the Kings, they searched in Amarna. They do not find the tomb. I really cannot answer this question, but I always say that you never know what the sand of Egypt might hide of secrets. The sand of Egypt may reveal important evidence about Nefertiti, which we should wait.
But what Zahi said implies Nefertiti was controversial, maybe even hated by some. So I'm wondering if this is the reason she's been so hard to find. Did someone want her gone? But who? And why? Maybe I'll learn more at my next stop, the temple of the great queen Hatshepsut, the first Egyptian queen who ruled as king. I've heard that her story could hold some clues to Nefertiti's fate.
How are you, Josh?
Archaeologists Ted and Lila Brock are going to show me around.
When did Hatshepsut live?
She lived in the late 16th, early 15th centuries BC.
It's about 100 years before Nefertiti?
Yeah, that's about right.
That's right. And
Both were beautiful and powerful queens, but apparently Hatshepsut had higher aspirations. She became pharaoh. Ted explains to me exactly how she achieved this most unusual feat.
When her husband, Thutmose II, died, his heir, Thutmose III, was still a young boy who couldn't apparently rule in his own right. So Hatshepsut adopted the role as being regent for this king. But after a couple of years, seems to have, for whatever reason, decided to become king herself and ruled for the next 20 years.
This is fascinating, though. The whole story of Hatshepsut definitely sets a precedent for a queen becoming king and effectively ruling.
That's certainly.
But since only men had ruled as pharaoh in ancient Egypt, she stayed in power by disguising herself as a man, the ancient Egyptian version of gender bending.
And you can see that she's wearing the kingly regalia. She's got on the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the crook and the flail, and the false beard.
Well, yeah, it's the beard that got me wondering. If she's a woman, how come she's got a beard?
Well, it's a false beard. You can even see the straps at the side where it's tied on.
What about body shape, though? These don't look like women's bodies.
It's definitely a male body shape here.
So she went with the male body for her statues, the male beard. I see there's a lot of face paint on these, too. What's the significance of that?
Well, men were normally depicted as with dark red skin, and women were shown with either yellow or pink.
So the dark red face paint, the fake beard, the male body, the crown, the scepters. This says Hatshepsut was a king.
That's right.
Could Nefertiti also have ruled as king? Lila told me earlier that Nefertiti may have used the male name Smenkhare as an alias. Is it possible she reinvented herself as Smenkhare and succeeded her husband to the throne, just like Hatshepsut? This might explain the mysterious disappearance of her name from the historical record. But if Nefertiti was as powerful as Hatshepsut, why aren't there any monuments or tombs or temples to her?
Male beard,
Ted tells me that part of the answer may be right here, on the walls of Hatshepsut's temple.
And any of the clues that went with it. And over here, looks like this was also erased.
That was erased by Thutmose III himself after Hatshepsut had died. An attempt really to suppress the memory of Hatshepsut as though she never existed. In some places, her name has been replaced by that either of her husband or her father.
It's kind of like what we saw at Amarna with the etchings taken out of Nefertiti and Akhenaten.
Yeah, a similar idea, a changing history, of rewriting it, as it were, so that it reflected what was considered proper.
Could this revisionist approach to history have caused Nefertiti's apparent disappearance? There's evidence that the Amarna tombs were defaced, and also the coffin, which may have belonged to Smenkhare, or Nefertiti's husband, Akhenaten. Was Nefertiti erased from the historic record, too? But who would want to go back, and why? The place to answer these questions is Karnak, the Hall of Fame for Egypt's greats.
Isn't this wild? Look at these pillars. Each one, the legacy of the kings and queens of Egypt and the gods they represented.
The question is whether I can find Akhenaten and Nefertiti in their rightful place among them. I'm going to visit some of the most secret haunts in Karnak. In my search for Queen Nefertiti, I've traveled the Nile from Amarna to Cairo to the Valley of the Kings. All I've found are a few sparse traces that Nefertiti lived at all, but nothing even close to the legacy of a great and beautiful Egyptian queen. If there is a memorial to her life, this is where I'll find it.
This is Karnak, part of ancient Egypt's capital called Thebes. During Akhenaten and Nefertiti's reign, Egypt was a superpower, and it was here, at the temples of Karnak, where its rulers sought to leave their mark.
Once again, I'm teaming up with archaeologists Ted and Lila Brock, who've been helping me solve this mystery.
Hello,
Nice to see you. Ted?
How are you, my man?
Pleasure. You ready?
These are the temples built by the great pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Karnak was the heart of their religion, where each tried to build a bigger, better Ted tells me the reason is hidden right here, in this massive structure called a pylon that was built after they died.
Several years ago, the restoration work was being carried out here, and they found that it was stuffed full of the talatot, the building blocks that Akhenaten used to construct his temple, used as filler inside the walls of these two towers. He's trying to hide the whole memory of Akhenaten and his cult, and Nefertiti and the Aten. Not just erasing it, but burying it.
Yeah, because if these walls had never collapsed, we wouldn't have known what was inside.
Now, it'd all still be hidden away.
These are the so-called talatot blocks that Akhenaten and Nefertiti's temple was made of. A pharaoh who succeeded them literally destroyed it block by block. But it seems even that wasn't enough. The pharaoh wanted Akhenaten and Nefertiti gone for good. So he hid the blocks deep inside the pylon. For 3,000 years, there was no trace of the king and queen's existence. More of their story remains locked away in this storage shed.
It's very rare that anybody ever gets into it.
It's because I'm with you?
That's right.
Thanks, After you.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Oh, you're welcome.
Come around to the left.
This is where they keep all the good stuff, huh?
Yeah, this is all the important blocks, decorated thousands of blocks here.
It really is just bits and pieces that are left.
That's all it is. They aren't assembled in any sort of order or anything. It's just all very random. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, all messed up.
And somebody lost the box top.
These blocks contain the hidden history of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They're engraved and painted with images that tell the story of their life and reign.
Let's see if we can find a Nefertiti.
They're bits and pieces.
But they must be reassembled in the correct order for the drama to play out, like a movie carved in stone.
This is Nefertiti here. That's her head and her face. And she's wearing 2 feathers on her head as a crown.
The story in these blocks promises to be an epic tale of how the most celebrated couple in the ancient world was almost condemned to everlasting anonymity.
Wow, so this is the actual paint.
Yeah, they were all originally painted. Really, it's an unsuccessful attempt to erase the memory of Aten and Akhenaten and Nefertiti.
As we walk through Karnak's great monuments, one question still remains. Why did Akhenaten and Nefertiti's successors so thoroughly annihilate all trace of their legacy?
This place is huge.
Yeah, if you really want to get a good overview of it, I know a secret passage we can go into that'll take us up above here, and we can look over the whole place.
Secret passage.
Yeah.
Lead the way.
Okay. Full of interesting things like bats, maybe snakes and scorpions.
Lovely. I like my secret passage. Oh yeah, look, there's the bats.
We just ran into it.
Yeah. It's like, what are you doing here? How you doing? There you go. That was fun. Fresh air. A bat actually landed on me.
Exploring Karnak has shed some light on just how important religion was in ancient Egypt. Could this have had something to do with the destruction of the temple?
Tell me what I'm seeing, Ted.
Well, this temple has been built over many generations. The columned hall of Seti and Ramses. You have, for example, obelisk of Hatshepsut there. This big enclosed courtyard here, and the pylon we're standing on of a later date.
So each time there was a new ruler, he or she would seek to leave their mark by building a temple here.
That's right. All to the glory of Amun.
But Akhenaten and Nefertiti worshipped a different god, called Aten. And their temple to Aten would have been a legacy fit for a king and queen who ruled the most powerful nation on earth. But another pharaoh destroyed it.
If this is supposed to be where kings leave their legacy, why would someone destroy their temple?
Well, Akhenaten closed down the temple of Amun. They set up a rival cult to the sun god Aten, suppressed the worship of Amun at the same time.
So those were 2 different gods.
That's right.
Amun and Aten.
That's right. And I suppose you'd say it was sort of vengeance on the part of the priesthood of Amun when the old way was restored after Akhenaten died. That they would erase Akhenaten's name, Nefertiti's name, and their images, demolish their temples, sort of as an act of reprisal.
So they were heretics?
Certainly they were considered heretics by later generations of pharaohs, yes. That's right.
And so while he's pharaoh, because he's pharaoh, everyone has to respect his wish.
Yes.
And so they're building these great temples for him, and everyone's sort of playing along saying, well, he's pharaoh, we have to do what he says. But when he dies, they say, sorry, we're not following that god anymore. Mm-hmm. Our god's back in power, and we're going to destroy your temple and everything you stood for.
That's about what happened, yes.
So it was all a monumental case of payback. No wonder it's been so hard to find Nefertiti's tomb, or mummy, or almost any trace of her life. Though we know so little about her, the few glimpses we do have reveal an ambitious woman who shook her nation to its very foundations. Even now, 3,000 years later, controversy still swirls around Nefertiti, and we never get tired of contemplating her life and death. She keeps us captivated, searching dark tombs, excavating ruins, and digging for the truth to unearth the secrets of Queen Nefertiti. Glimpses of royal vulnerability.
Are there other members of the royal family buried here?
Yeah, we have a burial place for Akhenaten farther down the tomb.
Finally, we reach Akhenaten's burial chamber. His sarcophagus was found here, smashed. But was Nefertiti buried here too?
Yeah.
Every time I find her image, it's like it's erased. All I see are vague outlines of the unusual shape of her crown.
That's right.
She seems to be everywhere, except we haven't found her sarcophagus here.
There's no evidence that she was ever buried in his tomb. No funeral furnishings for her were found, no depictions of her funeral, nothing to indicate that she was here.
Unfortunately, there's not much more that this tomb can tell me. But Ted's given me another clue. That Nefertiti's mummy could have been moved to a different tomb. Sounds intriguing. The site is near a place called Dar el-Bahri, which is 150 miles south of Amarna in the Valley of the Kings, the giant graveyard of Egypt's greatest rulers. Egyptian pharaohs were often buried in elaborate tombs filled with riches. But the tomb I'm headed for now held something even more precious to archaeologists: mummies. Tomb raiding was a serious crime problem in ancient Egypt. Kings were vulnerable from almost the moment they were laid to rest. Their riches and remains tempted looters willing to descend to the darkest depths of the earth. It was up to the priests to protect the royal mummies. And they came up with a brilliant plan. They started moving mummies. Could this be what happened to Akhenaten and Nefertiti? Is this why their mummies weren't found in the tomb built for them in Amarna?
Nigel? Hi, Josh.
Nigel Hetherington is an archaeologist familiar with this site. He tells me I'm going to be lowered into the tomb using this winch and cable. It's really dangerous. This rig is hardly ever used. More than 150 miles up the Nile River, and built a new city, now called Amarna. There, they started a new religion, unlike anything Egypt had known before. Their court was known far and wide for its fabulous wealth, its mystical god, and its charismatic young king and queen.
Today, the city has all but vanished, along with almost every trace of the captivating woman who was once its queen.
What could have happened to Nefertiti? Archaeologist Ted Brock is going to help me search for Queen Nefertiti. And what better place to start than the royal tombs of Amarna? While there's not much left of the city above ground, there's plenty to see underground. I'm hoping to find my first clues to the mystery of Nefertiti and her pharaoh husband, Akhenaten.
Wow. So Ted, what's this first site?
Well, I thought I'd bring you up here. See this tomb? It's a high priest of Aten named Mary Ray.
Mary Ray.
Yeah, the one who loves Ray. That's what his name means.
Ted explains that inside this locked tomb is a rare glimpse into the lives of Akhenaten and Nefertiti.
Here we've got an important scene of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Would you like a light?
We are surrounded by stunning images of the king and queen. Ted points out the main characters in each scene.
Akhenaten, Nefertiti. There are cartouches up there.
And it says Nefertiti.
Yeah. You can recognize over here that Nefertiti by her characteristic crown outlined here.
There are also images of the Aten, the sun god, depicted as a sun disk with rays coming out of it. Akhenaten and Nefertiti's new religion worshipped the Aten, and their religious revolution transformed ancient Egypt.
So over here is a more detailed version of the temple rituals, focusing on the royal family making offerings to the Aten.
The story of their new religion is literally carved into these tomb walls, as are the more practical and even personal aspects of their daily lives.
We're accompanied by Mary Ray.
But I'm determined to get to the bottom of the true story of Queen Nefertiti. I'm looking for clues into the mysterious disappearance of Queen Nefertiti. I found some hints of what her life was like in her capital city of Amarna. And I understand this secret tomb in Dar el-Bahri could give me some idea of what happened after her death. But it's not easy getting inside here, as archaeologist Nigel Hetherington and I are finding out.
Look over here. See that? That's a winch. They're actually going to lower us into the tombs. And they've just rigged up the cables, and they say that it's going to work.
This is definitely sketchy. The ropes are frayed, and the belts look like they're about to snap. But this winch is really the only way to get inside this tomb.
There's a lot of yelling going on here. Be nice to know what they're saying.
This shaft goes straight down into the solid rock, 40 feet deep. Even the toughest tomb raider would have had a hard time finding any mummies hidden here. To make it even more challenging, the priests fill the bottom of the shaft with rubble, creating yet another obstacle to the mummy's hiding place.
I am amazed that anyone would put anything down here. Over here? Okay. Hello there. A lot cooler down here, that's nice.
The last obstacle was a wall at the bottom of the shaft, sealing off the tunnel that led to the actual mummy cache.
We can knock our way through.
That's what this is for?
Yeah.
Okay. I just whack away, huh?
Yeah, just knock your way through.
Probably better if I use this.
Today, it's bricked up for protection. But we have special permission to chip through this modern cement wall to see what's on the other side.
Oh, sorry. I just hope there's something in there.
I feel like the famous archaeologist Howard Carter when he unearthed the amazing tomb of King Tut. He broke through a wall a lot like this one, and when he peered inside, he and his patron had an exchange that went down in history.
Ooh. Wow, what can you see, Josh?
Wonderful things. This week, join me as I travel back more than 3,000 years to unearth the true story of Queen Nefertiti. She was the most beautiful and mysterious woman in ancient Egypt, but suddenly, the super queen vanished without a trace.
Who was the mysterious Queen Nefertiti? Why did she disappear? Can her mummy still be found today? To find out, I'll follow a trail of clues into Egypt's most sacred and secret places. I'll explore dark tombs, descend a 40-foot shaft of sheer rock, and come face to face with ancient mummies. We're digging for the truth, and we're going to extremes to do it. December 6, 1912. Egyptologists excavating the city of Amarna make a stunning discovery. They come face to face with one of the most beautiful women in the world, Queen Nefertiti. This magnificent painted limestone bust soon becomes one of the most famous icons of ancient Egypt. It's also a clue in a mystery that captures the imagination of the world.
Nefertiti means the beautiful one has come. But where did she come from? And where did she disappear to? Hi, I'm Josh Bernstein, and I'm on the trail of one of the most elusive and alluring women in history, Queen Nefertiti.
Most ancient Egyptian royals spared no expense when it came to memorializing their lives. So you'd expect a queen as beautiful as Nefertiti to have an amazing monument to her memory, wouldn't you? But the view from this balloon shows me that there's nothing in Egypt to remind us of her life or death.
No temple, no tomb, no pyramid.
Archaeologists found the beautiful limestone bust of Nefertiti here in this 3,000-year-old ghost town. This was once the home of Queen Nefertiti and her husband, the pharaoh Akhenaten, one of the most controversial rulers in all of ancient Egypt. Akhenaten came to power in 1353 BC. Before his reign, the center of Egyptian life and power was the city of Thebes. Akhenaten and Nefertiti moved the capital.
And they're throwing out collars of gold to him, which were removed from here.
It really captured every part of their lives.
It's a really rich rendition of life, and I think that was important to them, to show all details of life.
It's like the first reality show. Just outside here.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, lead the way.
Ted says there's even more just outside the tomb. These statues of Akhenaten and Nefertiti are on one of the boundary stelae that once marked their city's limits.
There's some inscription that talks about cutting the tombs for the king, for his wife Nefertiti, and for the eldest daughter Meritaten.
So one tomb for each of them.
That's what it seems to say.
So there'd be 3 tombs somewhere nearby.
At least 3 tombs, but they wouldn't be nearby. They'd be way in the desert. It's a long ways away, a long hike up a wadi to reach them.
We could go there if we wanted to.
Yeah, you could go.
Yeah, so let's go for it.
The tombs we're heading for are those of the royals themselves. They're about 3 miles from here. On the way, Ted tells me more about this mysterious woman. Akhenaten gave Nefertiti tremendous power as a queen. This limestone bust is the best-known tribute found to date. But it raises some questions. If Nefertiti was one of the most influential women in the ancient world, why was such a beautiful work of art cast aside unfinished? We're now entering the royal tomb of Akhenaten, Nefertiti's pharaoh husband. It was discovered in the 1890s, relatively recently because of its remote location. Yet when archaeologists opened it, the contents they expected to find were already gone. Was it robbed? Or did something else happen?
Yes, there he is. There's Nefertiti.
The archaeologists who found this tomb removed some of the artwork from the walls for preservation. Akhenaten and Nefertiti's artwork is considered to be as revolutionary as their religion. No other Egyptian nobles were pictured in such scenes of family intimacy and affection. Tomb, in the chamber where Ted says the second daughter was buried.
Nefertiti is here, and they're in these their hands over their heads.
The images of them grieving provide rare
In this film, a team of international scientists hope to discover the answers. For the first time, they're bringing CT scanning technology to the Valley of the Kings to try and find conclusive evidence about the fate of Nefertiti and those closest to her. Could one of these mummies be Nefertiti? Or her?
Egypt, a land of hidden treasures, buried secrets, and spectacular new finds. These ancient rock carvings may be the key to understanding how this nation was born. They bring to life a long-forgotten king called Scorpion. The evidence suggests his reign laid the groundwork for history's most enduring civilization. Can today's archaeologists piece together the world of the Scorpion King? The glories of ancient Egypt, from its magnificent temples to its breathtaking burial chambers. Archaeologists have struggled to explain how this extraordinary society suddenly came into being 5,000 years ago. But now the latest in a series of discoveries is changing the way they think about the dawn of civilization itself. Jebel Chauti in southern Egypt, 10 miles to the west of the River Nile. Archaeologist John Darnell has been exploring this region for years. While tracing an early trade route through the arid landscape, he made a discovery that's shedding new light on one of Egypt's most intriguing rulers.
At this site is this natural rock shelf with some very nicely faceted bits of limestone that invite carving. The ancient Egyptians couldn't resist, and they very seldom did, fortunately, and this site is covered with inscriptions. We actually discovered the site very late in the day, so the light was beginning to fade.
In the confusion of ancient graffiti, one section leapt out at Darnell and his team.
On this very nice, high piece of rock were some very odd images that were clearly something very interesting, but we had no idea at the time what it would actually turn out to be.
Darnell began to unravel the tangle of scratched lines. He saw a procession of figures, humans and animals. The drawing was old, even by Egyptian standards. Its style dated it to 200 years before the pharaohs. Yet it also bore a symbol with which the pharaohs were linked: the image of the falcon god Horus. This was the emblem of a king.
The falcon comes to be the earliest designation of Egyptian kingship. There are a number of rulers who are known from a label of a falcon with some other symbol.
So Darnell was now looking for that second symbol to give him the name of a king. He found it directly below the falcon. It was one of the most distinctive creatures of the desert, the scorpion.
If this is indeed a tableau of a ruler who went by the specific royal designation of Horus Scorpion, then this is a monument of a king scorpion. And an actual attempt at a historical treatise of some event during the reign of King Scorpion.
Darnell still had to decode the scene's exact meaning, but the name itself caused great excitement. Historians had been hunting King Scorpion for nearly 100 years.
The Scorpion King actually is like a mysterious king. His name is very interesting to everyone.
The first sign he even existed was found 60 miles away from Jebel Chauti, at the ancient city of Hierakonpolis. In 1898, British archaeologist James Quibell unearthed a number of stone fragments covered in carvings. When he pieced them together, they formed a mace head. The mace, a stone mounted on a wooden shaft, was an early weapon of war. This outsized version was clearly meant for ceremonial use. Among the decorations on its surface, Quibell found the unmistakable image of a scorpion. As he studied the scene in more detail, he realized the central figure looked like a pharaoh. His headdress was a crown of the type worn by kings throughout Egypt's history. Other pieces of royal regalia are plain to see.
He's wearing the royal kilt. He's also got a bull's tail that hangs down beside. These things are only worn by kings.
So, who is he? Quibell turned to two symbols next to his head: the scorpion and a rosette. Together, they gave him a name.
We have other objects that have this little rosette followed by what is clearly a name, so we're reasonably sure that this mace head does in fact show us a king named Scorpion.
From the style of the carving, Quibell realized the mace head must date to early on in Egyptian history. The name alone seems to link him to the first pharaohs.
If you look at the kings of the first dynasty, you have King Fighter, King Fortress, King Cobra, King Slayer of Hearts. And so there's a kind of military or aggressive theme in these names. And I think that's because these kings were first and foremost defenders of their countries and also war leaders. And so King Scorpion with the deadly sting is a perfectly sensible name in that kind of atmosphere.
But Quibel and his colleagues were baffled. The Egyptians left detailed lists of successive dynasties of pharaohs. They were literally set in stone. None bore the name of Scorpion. But then, just yards from where he'd found the mace head, Quibel made a second discovery. It helped locate King Scorpion's place in history.
This is the amazing object we call the normal palette, which has been called the first historical document in the world.
The palette is a ceremonial version of a flat stone used to mix pigments and cosmetics. Decorated on both sides, the intricate carving again reveals the image of a king. Two hieroglyphs feature on both sides, a catfish and a chisel. They spell out a name, Nama. The style of the carving is similar to the mace head depicting the Scorpion King. The figures even wear the same royal headdress. But there is a key difference. There's a second crown worn only by Nama. It reveals he ruled a far greater territory. Scholars of Quibel's time knew that ancient Egyptians saw their land as having two distinct halves.
There was Upper Egypt, which was the narrow Nile Valley in the south of the country, and Lower Egypt, which was the broad expanse of the delta in the north. And so when a single ruler came to dominate the entire country, the symbolism of his rule echoed those two halves of the country.
Typical portrayals of a pharaoh show him wearing both the tall crown of Upper Egypt and the very different crown of Lower Egypt. Scorpion seems to reign over the south, but Nama rules north and south. This is the earliest image ever found showing a king ruling over both halves of Egypt. Experts concluded that the scenes record the moment Egypt was unified and Nama, in victory, became its first pharaoh. The parallels with the mace head suggested the Scorpion King came from the same era.
Because the way that Nama is depicted on that palette is so similar to the way that the Scorpion King is shown on the mace head, we can deduce that the Scorpion King must have been a contemporary or even earlier than Nama, and so a king before the first dynasty.
Scorpion displayed many characteristics of a full pharaoh, but he came from an earlier age. Archaeologists had just opened a door on a whole new chapter of Egyptian history. At the time, it was widely assumed that Egyptian civilization sprang up suddenly in around 3000 BC with the arrival of the first pharaohs.
Many people had thought it had to be an invasion of a superior race. The exquisite beauty of the things that the Egyptian civilization created. At the turn of the century, people didn't want to believe this was coming out of Africa. They wanted to root it in Mesopotamia or even in Europe. In some ways, it was quite racist.
Few Egyptologists questioned the accepted idea that the pharaohs were foreign invaders bringing rapid progress to a backward country. But with Quibel's discovery of a king who predated the pharaohs, cracks began to appear in this theory. The history books were about to be rewritten.
The discovery that there were kings even before Nama, even before the first dynasty, has forced Egyptologists to invent a new term, Dynasty Zero, which really comprises all the rulers from different parts of the country who reigned before the first dynasty.
James Quibel and his colleagues had revealed both a previously unknown era and the existence of a man whose name has intrigued experts ever since. Now, a century later, archaeologists are piecing together the life and remarkable achievements of the Scorpion King. Darnell is convinced these strange figures record a key event in Scorpion's life.
Going from right to left, then following the scorpion, is a standard, a divine standard, apparently an animal on a vertical pole, which is followed by a man in a long cloak holding a staff, possibly a priestly figure. This is the depiction of a prisoner. His arms are tied in a hideously contorted fashion behind his back. His hair is billowing out behind him rather wildly, and he's tied to this rope, held apparently in the hands of this large male figure brandishing a mace in the hand.
Darnell believes this is King Scorpion himself. His pose alone bears a striking resemblance to an image carved time and again by successive Egyptian pharaohs. Towering over an enemy prisoner, mace raised, they prepare to deliver a final blow. The scene was often just symbolic, but could also mark a military victory. Darnell believes his tableau celebrates a genuine battle. He sees further evidence in the pairing of a stork and a serpent at its center.
It's been suggested that the stork and serpent symbolizes essentially order over chaos. That would mean in this tableau that the author is trying to tell us that this depiction of King Scorpion and his prisoner means victory.
So who has the Scorpion King defeated and taken prisoner? One clue may lie in the location of the rock itself. It's on a road leading away from the ancient city of Nakada. Before the pharaohs unified Egypt, Nakada was a rival power base to Hierakonpolis and Abydos, the other great cities of southern Egypt.
We can visualize those three kingdoms beginning to compete for ultimate authority over the whole of Upper Egypt as we move through the pre-dynastic period.
On the carved mace head, King Scorpion wears the tall crown of Upper Egypt, suggesting that it was he who won this power struggle. Darnell believes the rock carving may record a decisive battle along the way.
As Scorpion and his prisoner are facing towards the ascent of the road behind, it looks as though he's leading his prisoner from the region of Nakada back along this road, probably towards Abydos.
If so, this is a milestone in the history of Egypt. By overcoming Nakada, the Scorpion King would have united all of Upper Egypt, the south, under his rule. This in turn paved the way for his successor, Narmer, to extend his power to the north and unite the whole of Egypt under its first pharaoh.
The tableau commemorates the event that was probably the final military action leading to the unification of Upper Egypt and the establishment of Dynasty 0.
Darnell has dated the rock carving to around 200 years earlier than the mace head. He believes this is a sign of just how important a figure King Scorpion was to Egypt's early rulers.
I believe that the Scorpion mace head may very well have been carved under Narmer in honor of the person Narmer may have believed to be the unifier of Upper Egypt, his spiritual and political predecessor.
It may be that Narmer's final domination of Egypt would never have happened without Scorpion's triumph in the south. On the mace head, this is shown as a crushing victory. Above the Scorpion King, the series of poles, topped with standards, are thought to represent different regions. The symbolism is brutal. From each standard, a lapwing bird hangs by its neck, signifying the subjugation of each region's people to their new Scorpion master. It's perhaps glimpse inhabited.
To rise to the top in that kind of world, the Scorpion King must have been not only very strong leaders with great military skill, but also very charismatic leaders with the ability to garner support and to motivate people to follow them in their quest for glory.
Darnell believes his find has revealed Scorpion as a great warrior king, the man who first brought the territory of southern Egypt under the control of one ruler. But archaeologists have also discovered new evidence for the achievements of his reign. They found it in his tomb. The ancient city of Abydos lies just to the west of the Nile. This is where Darnell believes King Scorpion took his bound prisoner. It is also the burial place of Egypt's earliest pharaohs. Egyptians believed Osiris, the god of the dead, was buried here. That the site is littered with fragments of pottery is testament to this belief.
For centuries, pilgrims came here to worship Osiris, and they left their offering, pottery mainly. One may roughly estimate there are about fragments of 10 million pots here, but it's hard to count them.
Günther Dreyer was excavating the tombs of early pharaohs when he realized he'd come upon something much older and even more spectacular.
We revealed the first brick walls and couldn't believe it. There was one big chamber, and another chamber, and another chamber, and another chamber.
Now hidden once more beneath the sands to protect the mud brick structures, the tomb is composed of 12 chambers measuring over 800 square feet. Carbon dating revealed it had been built some 200 years before the first pharaohs.
We were so surprised because we didn't expect a tomb of that size for that period. So all this changed our idea of the early development of Egypt completely.
It was christened Tomb UJ.
That's Tomb UJ as we excavated it. This large chamber is the burial chamber to the west. There is some discoloration on the floor indicating the position of a large wooden shrine.
Whoever had been buried here was rich and powerful. Grave robbers had stripped out any precious objects, but numerous jars remained that had once contained supplies of oil and beer. There were 700 wine jars, enough to provide nearly 1,200 gallons. Then Dreyer had a breakthrough moment, proof that this was the tomb not of some wealthy merchant, but of a king.
In the corner here we found this crooked scepter in ivory. It's a leftover of the equipment of the king, certainly indicating that that was the tomb of a ruler.
The ivory scepter was a precursor of the crook buried in Tutankhamun's tomb over 18 centuries later, one of the key symbols of a pharaoh's power. But which ruler did the scepter belong to? As Dreyer pieced together the pottery fragments, he discovered more clues, symbols of plants and animals. The jars originally contained oil or fat. Dreyer believes the markings show the estate that they came from and that each animal is the name of the estate's owner. Among the motifs is a scorpion.
This scorpion with his claws and the poisonous tail here. And a little plant below.
And it wasn't just one jar.
By far most frequent are the scorpions with the plant. We have about 70 scorpions, but only 6 fish, 5 snails, and so on. All these jars probably came from an estate founded by a ruler scorpion. And that's why we think that this is the tomb of that very scorpion.
Dreyer is convinced he has found the burial place of a king called Scorpion. And its date is a close match for the rock carving tableau discovered some 40 miles away by John Darnell.
What's very interesting about this tableau is that some of the closest parallels for various elements come from Tomb UJ at Abydos. In fact, based on style, on the iconography, this tableau could very well date to the lifetime of the man buried in Tomb UJ.
It seems that when the South was first unified, King Scorpion chose Abydos as the burial place for its rulers. The find was a major breakthrough in the search for this elusive figure. But as Dreyer analysed the tomb and its contents further, he found extraordinary new evidence that Scorpion may have played an even more vital role in the very birth of Egyptian civilization. Dreyer believes this was the origin of the palace-like tombs of the pharaohs. The exterior of Scorpion's tomb may also have contained the idea behind one of the pharaoh's most iconic inventions, the pyramid.
All these chambers had been roofed with wooden beams, a layer of matting on top, then some mud bricks, plaster, and most likely above there was this heap of sand and rubble forming an artificial mound.
Dreyer's excavations at Abydos have revealed that this mound developed over time into a stone superstructure known as a mastaba. This became the standard royal tomb until around 600 years after King Scorpion. Pharaoh Djoser was the first to stack smaller and smaller mastabas on top of each other. The result was the step pyramid and the massive structures we know today. Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's chief archaeologist, has been studying the pyramids for years. With the discovery of King Scorpion's tomb, he now believes these iconic monuments owe a major debt to the ideas that first took shape in pre-dynastic Egypt.
Without this period, we'll not see the great of pyramids and tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And this is why I really think that pre-dynastic period built Egypt.
And now there is growing evidence linking the Scorpion King to the birth of one of the hallmarks of civilization, writing. Scattered inside, Dreyer found about 180 small ivory tags. Each one was inscribed with mysterious images. Some obviously animals, others less clear. The implications are staggering.
When we found the first of these little tags in the sand filling of the chambers, we couldn't believe it. Because at the first glance, they resemble later hieroglyphs, but we knew writing only from a much later period, 200 years later. Could it be possible, was our question, that they knew writing already?
Hieroglyphs use both meaning and sound signs, which combine to form words. The pharaohs used hieroglyphs as the language of their kingdom for thousands of years. But no one had ever found any sign of hieroglyphs predating the pharaohs. It had always been thought that the idea of writing first arose not in North Africa, but in the Middle East, in ancient Mesopotamia. Here, by the time of the first pharaohs, a system of accounting, now called cuneiform, had already developed into writing. In Tomb UJ, which predates the pharaohs, each of the tags had a hole in it, suggesting it had once been attached either to the wooden boxes, whose remains were found nearby, or to a...
What could be the use of such labels? As decoration? Not very likely. They had been fixed with these holes to something, and it was most likely that they transferred some information. So we started to understand them and to read them.
The breakthrough came when Dreyer found tags that made sense as hieroglyphs. One showed a stork and a seat.
What could be the meaning? Seated stork? Not very likely. But we know from later hieroglyphic writing, they represent phonetic values, phonetic sounds. The stork would be read ba, the seat, set. Together we could read Ba Set, and that in fact is the name of a city in the delta.
Ba Set was an ancient city over 300 miles to the north of Abydos. Dreyer now found other tags that could also be read as Egyptian place names.
The important thing is this is phonetic writing. Signs represent sounds of a language. And that's a major step in developing of writing. And these are the earliest examples of such phonetic writing, much earlier than what we know from Mesopotamia.
It means that the oldest piece of writing ever found is Egyptian. Dreyer's discovery is momentous.
And it shows the birth of civilization came with writing to Egypt long time before we thought. That was the beginning of writing.
Dreyer believes the tags were inscribed with the names of the cities and estates that sent their goods as taxes to the king. The decoding of these symbols has opened an incredible new window on the past.
We don't know about events or persons, rulers, without writing. And what we learn from Tomb Uj, the scorpion, King Scorpion's tomb, we regained 250 years of history of mankind.
The tags also reveal that the Scorpion King's influence reached far beyond his own territory in the south. As well as the hieroglyph for Bar Set, Dreyer found the name of a second city in the north, Buteau. Built on what was once the Mediterranean coast, recent excavations are confirming that this was a thriving trade hub with access to markets in the east. And it may have been vital to King Scorpion's interests. Many of the wine jars in his tomb came from outside Egypt, 500 miles from Abydos, in ancient Palestine.
No, he had trade relations to the Near East, to Palestine. And he must have been able to safeguard this trade route. So his influence must have been considerable.
So it seems the Scorpion King oversaw a critical period of Egyptian history. Not only was trade bringing north and south closer together, but the seeds were being sown for the glories that followed.
In Dynasty Zero, all the fundamental building blocks of ancient Egyptian civilization were first put in place. Notions of kingship, of authority, of control of the economy, of religion and art and architecture. It's in Dynasty Zero that these fundamentals are really put in place for the first time.
But now new evidence is suggesting that King Scorpion may have inherited a world far more sophisticated than was previously thought. Ancient Egypt. Traditionally, scholars thought this sophisticated society had arisen so suddenly, the pharaohs must have come from somewhere else.
Egyptologists looking at the great achievements of the pharaohs couldn't bring themselves to believe that Egyptian civilization had been created by North Africans, by the Egyptians themselves. They thought it must have been brought to Egypt from a more enlightened land as they saw it to the east, perhaps modern Mesopotamia.
Recent discoveries relating to the Scorpion King are showing just how wrong the early scholars were. A scene carved on a desert rock face suggests he played a key role in uniting the cities of Egypt 200 years before the first pharaoh. And the discovery of his tomb revealed evidence that some of the greatest achievements of Egyptian culture, the birth of writing and the invention of the pyramid, may have had their roots in his reign. The Scorpion King's existence was first discovered a century ago at the ancient city of Hierakonpolis in southern Egypt. Fresh excavations here are giving a remarkable new insight into his world. It appears to have been far more advanced than experts ever thought. The team of archaeologists is led by Dr. Renee Friedman. She's found proof that there was already a mighty city here centuries before the Scorpion King.
We know that it spread for at least 3 kilometers along the edge of what is now the low desert.
But Friedman has discovered an artifact that proves this god was being worshipped here hundreds of years before.
And this is the earliest datable statue of Horus, of a falcon, that we know of from pre-dynastic Egypt. It's really, really great to find one here.
Friedman has dated the falcon to 700 years before the first pharaohs. Her team have made other finds from the same period. They too are the earliest examples of their kind. One of the pharaoh's hallmarks was their centralized production of food and drink. Rations were then distributed to the people as pay or handouts. Evidence that this system was in place much earlier at Hierakonpolis has emerged with the discovery of an industrial-scale catering operation.
In the center would have been a large ceramic vat that would have stood about this tall, perhaps, and supporting it and suspending it up above the ground were these fire bars. And they had these fishtail ends, and they're arranged kind of on an angle, and then they would be cemented to the pot, so it stays absolutely still. And then fire is added around the sides. So what you're getting is a low, even heat.
7 more huge vats filled the gully. Walls of mud and pottery fragments enclosed the space, making sure the heat didn't escape. The final product was another surprise.
We get this residue, which is essentially burnt sugars. Imagine taking sugar and burning it to the bottom of your pot. That's what we're getting. But we've done the starch analysis on it, and we can see that the starches have been fermented. So we know for sure that what they're making here is beer.
Beer made from bread was a staple part of the Egyptian diet in the time of the pharaohs. And it's clear there was already a huge demand in ancient Hierakonpolis.
The brewery, with at least 8 vats, would have made over 1,000 gallons of beer every time it was in use. And it's estimated it could be brewing beer every 2 days. It's more than just what one family might need.
For Friedman, it's further proof that Egypt began much earlier than anyone had ever thought.
No one had expected this kind of advanced civilization at this period, and it continued to be a real question, both in our minds and other people's. Who's running the show then?
Not far from the breweries, the city of the Falcon God is yielding up a spectacular answer. Friedman has uncovered the foundations of a tomb complex. It's the burial ground of the ancient king of Hierakonpolis.
This is the largest tomb of its time period yet known, and that time period is about 3800 BC. It's 5.5 meters by 3 meters, so it's 2 to 3 times larger than anything we've ever known.
The excavations are revealing building projects on a monumental scale. King Scorpion's ancestors may have lived among them, and they could also have inspired the massive architecture of the pharaohs. Around the tomb are holes which once held wooden columns. One base is still intact, an extraordinary 6 millennia later. It's made from acacia wood, a sign that trees once grew in this barren landscape. The posts were embedded to a depth of almost 5 feet. Friedman believes they were meant to support a huge structure.
You may be looking at something that's 6 meters above ground. An acacia tree at full size can grow to be 10 meters. So it could be something quite dramatic.
The span between the posts suggests they were designed to take a roof, possibly of reed matting. Fragments of red plaster and cedar wood from the Middle East point to walls expensively finished and decorated with colourful designs.
To imagine these tall structures with this splash of color must have been really impressive, a real sight to be seen.
Inside the tomb itself, excavators found objects that prefigure some of the classic works of art commissioned by the pharaohs. They include the nose and ears from Egypt's earliest life-size statue and ceramic burial masks.
You're trying to protect your head, you're trying to protect your face for eternity. So they are the precursors of the gilded masks, the mask of Tutankhamun with its gold and its lapis lazuli incrustations. This is where it all began.
Just yards from the tomb, the archaeologists found the remains of a second wooden structure, This was also a clear prototype for the stone architecture of the pharaohs.
So over here we have what must be a funerary temple, the earliest in Egypt, like everything here. It's a whole area where there's no graves, but we have these large pillared halls. Imagine a forest of columns rising up.
With a design similar to the tomb but on a much larger scale, this was a sophisticated structure that would have stunned those who walked through it.
Again, we also know that there was color. We have plaster on the walls, we have red, we have green, we have figural decorations. So imagine walking into something like that, standing proud in this wadi.
This was the direct ancestor of the monumental hyper-style hall at Karnak, built some 2,000 years later. Excavations have revealed an entire royal cemetery, a sacred enclosure full of tombs and temples. It's now clear that Scorpion and the kings of Dynasty Zero built on the achievements of the rulers buried here.
Kings that were once considered to be the first, the earliest, are now clearly just the heirs to a long tradition of development and innovation that began 500 years before they were even born.
The finds at Hierakonpolis may help experts to imagine the city King Scorpion would have lived in. Now archaeologists are seeing clues in his intriguing royal regalia that could take the history of Egypt even further back in time. Inside the tomb, which may once have held the body of King Scorpion, archaeologists found a crooked scepter, a precursor of one buried with King Tutankhamun 18 centuries later. Experts now see it as a sign that Egyptian culture may have had its earliest roots in a surprising place, the desert. Today, most of Egypt's population is crammed into the narrow strip of cultivated land that borders the Nile. To the east and west lie large swathes of arid desert. In one of its least explored areas, the Eastern Sahara, Rudolf Cooper has been collecting evidence of human activity. He believes that rock art here predates the pharaohs by thousands of years, and the carvings depict the impossible: elephants in the middle of the desert.
You see the tail, you see the legs, you see the tusks here, and then the long, long trunk ending here. I think a picture of an elephant here in the desert seems to be like a miracle.
The explanation: climate change. Around 10,000 BC, monsoon rains transformed the Sahara from a desert into a fertile land, home to elephants, ostriches, and many other animals that have long since vanished from the region.
The plants came, the animals followed, and finally man followed the animals. These people were hunters, gatherers, and fishers.
Rock art also seems to show that later, around 3,000 years before the pharaohs, the hunters of the Sahara turned into herdsmen of cattle, sheep, and goats. Cooper has found traces of these nomads scattered across the vast desert. But despite centuries of excavation, there's hardly any evidence of human beings living at this time in the Nile Valley.
The reason might be that the environment in the Nile Valley was too moist, and that there were a lot of illnesses and so on, that people didn't like to live there.
But then the rains dried up once more. The savanna began changing back into desert. The nomads began moving out. 1,000 years before the pharaohs, and they had mostly gone, spanning out in all directions through Africa. At the same time, settlements are found springing up in the Nile Valley, now no longer too damp and unhealthy. This period of climate change and migration could explain why Egyptian civilization arose when it did.
We might call the desiccation of the Sahara a motor of Africa's history.
It seems those who headed east to the Nile Valley took their desert culture with them.
They brought with them not only their economy and their way of living, they also brought with them their beliefs, their ideologies. And maybe some of this can be traced back even in the religion of ancient Egypt.
The nomadic herdsmen of the desert, so close to their animals, were perhaps the origin of some of the most important symbols of the pharaoh's power.
The classic pharaonic regalia of the crook and the goad, two items used in animal husbandry, take us back to those prehistoric origins of ancient Egyptian rulers as cattle herders.
Before the pharaohs, the Scorpion King was also buried with a crook, carved in ivory. And this wasn't the only herder's emblem he passed on to his successors.
From the Scorpion King and the Nama palette onwards, one of the key items of royal regalia worn in the pharaoh's waistband was a bull's tail, a symbol of virility and of animal power. And again, it casts us back to that prehistoric period of cattle herding.
2,400 years ago, the Greek historian Herodotus described Egypt as the gift of the Nile. Cooper believes that's just half the story.
If we include the results from the desert, one might perhaps say Egypt is also, not completely, but also the gift of the desert.
These discoveries are completing the work begun by James Quibell, who first revealed the Scorpion King's existence a century ago. He was among the first to question the common assumption that a superior race arrived from outside to kick-start Egyptian civilization. Now a very different picture has emerged.
Egypt no longer seems to arise as if from nowhere with the pyramids or with the First Dynasty, but we can trace its origins right back into prehistory, and it puts a whole new light on the development of civilization in North Africa.
The search for the Scorpion King has revealed a man who was a pivotal figure in the creation of ancient Egypt.
He was a mysterious king, but now we can really see what he did, what kind of things that he achieved, and we can see a real man in front of us.
He built on the achievements of earlier cultures, epitomized by the great city of Hierakonpolis. He helped unify Egypt through trade and battle.
The events that Scorpion's union of Upper Egypt sets in motion really set the stage for much of what we think of as the main elements of pharaonic civilization.
He organized his kingdom with the world's earliest phonetic writing system. He began a new style of burial that may have inspired the complex tombs and pyramids of the pharaohs. Now at last, experts are discovering the true origins of ancient Egypt and the remarkable legacy of the Scorpion King.
He was the last of Egypt's great pharaohs, a warrior, a master strategist, and then, one night,